What is up? GoodMicWork, back at you. What you're about to watch here is a re-upload. As most of you know, recently, the WWE went through and blocked about a dozen of my videos on YouTube. A lot of my older pay-per-view and DVD reviews, and a few other commentaries where I had used some video footage, with no audio, just me talking over it, but somehow it got matched or reported or whatever, and WWE blocked the videos. I tried to dispute them. They all came back denied. No big deal, whatever, right? I wasn't monetizing these videos back then because I was using a little bit of video footage. I assumed it was all protected under fair use, but YouTube guidelines and copyright laws are all fucked up. Me, ever the optimist, I'm always positive. I make the best out of a horrible situation, and I'm not even that freaked out. Most of these videos that got taken down were 2 to 3, and I think maybe even 4 years old in some cases. So they're very old, but at the same time, it disappointed a lot of you that said, oh, I like going back and watching some of those old DVD reviews or whatever. So what I decided to do is re-upload all of them, and I'm just going to sprinkle them out to you, maybe like one a week here in the next, several weeks, just to kind of slowly get them all back in. They're going to lose a ton of views. Most of these had, 50, 60, 70,000 views on them. So I'm not going to get those type of numbers, obviously, on these videos, but these are just a way to give them back to you so you guys have them. All of the issues that the previous video had with the video footage I've just taken out. I've put the new graphics up, give you guys a more updated intro, and remind you to visit my website, GoodMicWorkCommentaries.com, and follow me on Twitter at GoodMicWork, like my Facebook page, and like this video. This video is going to need it. Since this is a re-upload, it's very old. I could use all the likes I can get, share it, and just enjoy the old content from me. I will warn you that these commentaries were mostly done with a really crappy microphone with no pop filter, so this is not my best work. It's not quite as sharp. It was still a hobby for me back then, and my YouTube channel was still in its infancy, and plus my opinions. Who knows what I even said? The statute of limitations on my opinions are gone. Don't give me shit in the comments about anything you hear here. I don't even remember what I said, so if you disagree with something, who cares? I probably don't even feel that way anymore. So I apologize for the dated content and the quality being a little bit less, but I didn't want the videos to completely go away. I figured I would just re-upload them to you so you can continue to enjoy them, and I can replenish my pay-per-view and DVD review playlist down below on my channel. So sit back and relax and enjoy an old school re-upload.
Watch the blade.
This DVD is one of my most requested ones that I get. When I first started doing these, I would have never thought that Triple H would be one of my most requested DVD reviews, and I was actually thinking of holding this one off for a long time. This was not on my list of ones that I wanted to do. But I needed to kind of make a decision quickly, and since this one, like I said, is requested so many times, I figured we'd take a look at Thy Kingdom Come, 3 DVD set on Triple H's life and career that I believe was released around 2013. But I think it was definitely worth watching, and it was a pretty well done piece on Triple H's career. I rewatched the whole thing before I did this commentary, and I did enjoy it. There was a couple things that I wish they would have maybe elaborated on, or a few things that they might have left out. And plus, on top of that, Triple H is such a controversial character, especially amongst, the dirt sheets and the internet wrestling community, people who, like to give this guy shit for things that he may or may not have done to careers, and he gets the same type of heat that a guy like John Cena gets. So his life story and wrestling career, there are some controversial moments there that I think maybe they could have touched on a little bit more. But for the most part, I thought the DVD was pretty well done, and we're going to take a look at the whole thing here. We'll go through step-by-step Triple H's career, what they talked about on the documentary. I'll also go through all the bonus features and extras and matches that they've included on this set, and we'll pretty much get into everything. Lots of people were interviewed for this documentary as well. There's some really good interviews from a lot of guys on this. Triple H's parents were on this, The Undertaker, William Regal, Brock Lesnar, Terry Taylor, Jim Ross, Mick Foley, Harley Race, Kevin Nash, Vince McMahon, Stephanie, Diamond Dallas Page, Shawn Michaels, just to name a few. Now, I suppose there could be some cynics out there that think that maybe the WWE really worked hard to paint Triple H in the best light possible for this documentary, because he is going to be the future owner of this company along with his wife Stephanie. When Vince McMahon passes away, which honestly we're not that far off from, we're talking 10, 20 years here, and Vince is going to be gone. They are going to be the people in charge. So naturally, they're not going to get into too many controversial subjects on this DVD, and I'm sure they intentionally wanted Triple H to look as good as possible. Now, much like John Cena, as you guys have heard me talk about over the years, I've always had Triple H's back. I've really, there's definitely some things that he's done that I'm not going to deny. And the problem with people that are on two sides of a fence when it comes to haters or a highly hated wrestler, or as opposed to defending him, there's no middle ground. You're either 100% against against them or you're a fanboy. And that's where some of the haters are so ignorant in their line of thinking, is that they cannot go in between at all. They cannot recognize anything good about somebody that they're already predisposed to hate. And some of my biggest arguments about John Cena are that, hey, I'm not saying that the guy maybe hasn't won a match or two that I wish he would have lost. All I'm saying is he's not the Antichrist. And the same goes with Triple H. You know, don't ever say that Triple H buries everybody and he never wants to do a job, because that's bullshit. He's put a ton of people over in his career. I think he even lost 4 or 5 WrestleManias in a row, including tapping out in a couple of them. He tapped to Cena. He tapped to Benoit. He lost to Batista at WrestleMania and the following 2 pay-per-views after that. The guy will put someone over when he wants to, and when he's willing to do business, he really does. He has really launched a couple of guys in the WWE, and they owe their careers to him. Now, there's some other situations where people say, oh, yeah, but he shouldn't have beat Booker T at WrestleMania 19. I disagree, but the fact that he did or didn't, to me, I understand some of those arguments. Okay, maybe Booker should have won. Maybe there was a couple other things that he did that he shouldn't have. And I know with politics and wrestling, especially with him being involved in the Click, you know him and Kevin Nash and Scott Hall and Shawn Michaels, they stepped on throats throughout their entire careers. All of those guys did. And when you combine that with dating Stephanie and marrying her, of course, naturally, he's going to have a shit ton of jealousy from not only his peers, but from the wrestling fans as well. And they're going to refuse to accept him because they feel that he gets his spot because of his relationship with Stephanie McMahon. And that's not 100% true. It's not 100% false, but it's definitely not 100% true, because when you look at Triple H and who he is a good worker. And he's actually a decent person. They talk about where he grew up in this DVD, in this nice little small, wholesome town in New Hampshire. His parents seem like very, very nice people. He grew up right. He had great work ethic. He was dedicated. He didn't do drugs. He didn't drink. He wasn't into all sorts of, crap that a lot of young kids are involved in. And even in his adult life, he kept his nose clean. When he was younger, maybe he had some immaturity issues, because we all know what DX represented in the 90s, how childish and juvenile and profane those guys were, and maybe a little bit of that rubbed off on Triple H in his real life. So I'm definitely not saying the guy is perfect and you should bow down and kiss his feet, but I think people that hate Triple H and think that he's a worthless sack of shit are completely insane. At least with a guy like Triple H, like I've just said, he loves professional wrestling. His whole life is the business. When he grew up watching and fell in love with wrestling and then became a wrestler and then associated himself with the Click in the WWE, and all they did was talk about the business 24/7 while on the road, he literally eats, breathes, and sleeps it. And he still does to this day, even more so, because now he's going to be owning the fucking company. And he cares. Look what he's done to NXT. Look how he brought Bruno Sammartino in. So Triple H, I think, deserves a lot of credit, and you can hate him on some things, but you got to be mature enough to meet in the middle somewhere and not just automatically insist and assume that Triple H is the worst thing that has ever happened to the wrestling business. Trust me, you're actually going to benefit from a guy like Triple H being in charge as opposed to Vince McMahon being in charge. You could do a lot worse than Triple H. Imagine if Stephanie McMahon married Balls Mahoney. How great do you think the WWE would be? I think a lot of the hate on Triple H is very unwarranted. Maybe some of it he deserves, but definitely not at the level that he receives it, much like a guy like John Cena. So that's my quick little statement, brief statement defending Triple H and kind of letting you guys know where I stand on the man's career. That way, when we talk about this DVD, I don't sound like too much of a kiss ass. So the story starts off with his childhood and his upbringing, talking about the little shit town they lived in New Hampshire, which was actually voted like best place to live. Just looks like a really good, wholesome, small town. Triple H, probably grew up perfectly there with all sorts of structure. And it's really a pretty good example of what I truly believe is that you are a product of your environment. He was just a really well brought up young man. He talked about when he discovered wrestling. He said he played all sorts of sports, football and Little League and shit like that. And I guess he was 4 or 5, screwing around in the living room, and his dad turned on the TV. Every wrestler has a story like this. I myself have a story like this. And he talks about how his dad just turns on the TV and it's Chief Jay Strongbow wrestling somebody, and he climbed up on his dad's lap and started watching and was hooked from that point on. He began bodybuilding as a teenager around age 14, too. He was doing bodybuilding contests and shit like that. I think he won his dad said he won Mr. Teen New Hampshire, which is hilarious to think about. And bodybuilding became a really big part of his life. They showed a lot of pictures, too, from those old days when he was lifting weights and really working on his body and stuff. He even started working at his gym. And while he was there, he met Ted Arcidi, who was also a professional wrestler and one of the world's strongest men. And he developed a friendship with him. And I guess after, a few months or even a couple of years of him badgering Ted Arcidi to get him trained or get him in the door of professional wrestling or get him some phone numbers to wrestling schools, he got Killer Kowalski's number, who had a school nearby. So basically, he chose Killer Kowalski based on location. It was really close to where he lived. I think he could drive back and forth, and he ended up calling him up and got trained by Killer Kowalski. They showed a lot of his training footage, too, in some of his early matches when he had just gotten in 1992 with a horrendous haircut. Back then, I'll never forget, in the 90s, for some reason, the in thing to have was to have a crazy mullet with basically like a flat top and then just really long in the back or a long rat tail or something like that. Just horrible, horrible style back then. Even John Laurinaitis, when he was in WCW, the ridiculous fucking mullet he had, Triple H's kind of looked like that. But some of that footage of him training and stuff I had never seen before, so it was pretty cool to see that. Pretty funny story of how he got the name Terra Ryzing as well. I guess Kowalski was the one that had originally gave him that name. Now, he even used that in his first stint in WCW. But the story Triple H tells on the documentary is that Killer Kowalski wanted to call him the Terrorizer, and Triple H is like, that's just fucking generic as hell. He wanted to have a first and last name, so Kowalski says, you want a first and last name? Fine. And he draws a line right through the name. He goes, now you're Terra Ryzer. So I guess that's where that whole thing came from. Pretty funny story. It eventually morphed into Terra Ryzing, and that's what he worked with on the indie scene, and finally when he got his chance to work with WCW. Now, I guess his gym that he was working at sent him to do a convention, and one of the things they said in the documentary we're talking about, which I really liked and have always admired about Triple H, is he's always very prepared. Again, it goes back to when I'm saying this is a guy that's going to be in charge one day. Anybody who's not happy about that, like I said, you can do a lot worse than him. At least he's got his shit together. And even back then, he said, as soon as I had my first match, I immediately went out and had 8x10 photos made. I printed up a resume full of lies to make it look like I was really great. That way I was ready anytime I met a promoter or anybody to get my foot in the door. Anywhere in professional wrestling, I wanted to be prepared. And how many wrestlers back then do you think were doing that? Not too many of them were that ambitious. A lot of them were just barely scraping by with money. They probably weren't making a lot of money because they were working the indie scene or still getting trained and probably just had part-time jobs. So it's not like they could go out and do this kind of stuff. So Triple H was able to get this shit put together, and then he gets sent to this convention where WCW is going to be represented by Ric Flair. So he gets to talking with Ric Flair, takes a picture with him, meets somebody else, I think by the name of Chip Burnham, who also represented WCW. Said to him, hey, I'm interested in joining your company. And he's like, yeah, well, send me your stuff. And he's like, no, I've got it right here. Here you go. Here's a tape. Here's a resume. Here's an 8x10 photo, all this shit. And so he took it back to WCW and gave it to another guy. So it was basically like a chain of 4 guys that ended up passing Triple H's stuff down until finally it made it to Eric Bischoff. He liked what he saw, and he called Triple H in for an interview. And in a pretty cool story, this is something that I've heard before, but Triple H mentioned it on the documentary. And it's just another one of these examples how Triple H always just seemed like he was thinking a little bit differently than a lot of wrestlers. So Triple H gets offered a 2-year deal by WCW, by Eric Bischoff. And he actually asks him if he can just do 1 year. And Bischoff looks at him like he's crazy. I'm offering you 2 years at $52,000 a year. And Triple H says, well, at $52,000, I'm going to starve. Now, I don't know how accurate that is. In 1992, $52,000 was a pretty decent chunk of money. Even today, it's not that bad considering where you live. As long as your cost of living isn't that high, you can live off $52,000. So I think Triple H saying he was going to starve was a bit of a stretch, but still, he wanted to make more. He wanted to be more successful. So he said, let me work here 1 year. You're either going to know if I have something or not in 1 year's time. And by the end of that year, you're either going to re-sign me for a lot more money, or you're going to realize I never had anything to begin with, and you're going to get rid of me. So basically, it was a big roll of the dice for Triple H to do that because, he could have been losing, a year's worth of income if WCW decided not to keep him around. So he came in as the Terra Ryzing gimmick with the big, long hair. They showed a lot of footage from his early matches in WCW. I remember him in WCW because I would always watch their Saturday night show. I've been watching that shit on Saturday night since the early 80s. So now, seeing Triple H come in as Terra Ryzing, I remember remember him, I remember not being really that impressed with him and not really liking him that much. But he was having some decent matches. They even interviewed Road Dogg on this DVD, and when he was in WCW for a short time under his real name, Brian Armstrong, they had a bunch of matches together. And they would both basically jump over to WWE at the same time, too, right after that, which was interesting because Road Dogg was in the WWE by early 1995, and Triple H was there around mid-1995. So those guys wrestled more than once on WCW's TV shows. He even got a chance to wrestle Ricky the Dragon Steamboat and some other guys. So, Triple H was basically putting on pretty decent matches, and for an enhancement talent, he was getting a ton of experience, and they mentioned that he was spending a shit ton of time at the power plant. Now, how ironic is that? They talk about how Triple H was a contracted performer. He didn't need to be down there, but he was down there anyway because he wanted to learn. They're like, he was there every fucking day in the power plant, learning and teaching and training and all this shit. And now you see him today and everything he's done with the WWE Performance Center, and WCW was the first ones to start this, when they really started getting big and started taking over from WWE, they developed that power plant. And I remember saying to myself, wow, that's a really good idea, because now they were going to give themselves a chance to really grow wrestlers. And if you want to learn where to go and wrestle, a lot of guys that come in now that need to get their foot in the door, they're going to want to go to the power plant before they were going to want to go to WWE, because WWE doesn't have a power plant. So I remember at the time being worried as a fan of WWE and not really liking WCW too much. I was worried that, oh shit, nobody's going to go to the WWE now because they don't have a school. If you're an aspiring wrestler and you're looking in the phone book for all these different wrestling schools, yes, there's many of them out there that you could attend, but WCW is mainstream. So naturally, you're going to want to go there because it's already one foot in the door getting yourself on TV. Where if you go to somebody else's wrestling school, you might not even get noticed. So I was worried that WCW was this was a big thing for them. And the power plant never really lasted too long, a couple years, 2 or 3 years or whatever, and WCW was out of business anyway. But still, the idea of it was very good, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if a lot of philosophies used in the Performance Center, some of that was born and came from the WCW's power plant idea. Terry Taylor spent a lot of time with him there as well. Triple H spent a lot of time putting over Terry Taylor, and as did Terry Taylor putting over Triple H. I'm wondering if these guys have ever sucked each other's dicks, because it certainly seemed like that on the DVD. I never really liked Terry Taylor that much, but Triple H has a lot of good things to say about him, and he credits him with being one of the main reasons why he became a star in the first place and everything he learned from Terry Taylor. He even had a run-in with the Big Show, who was also on this DVD documentary. I don't know if I mentioned his name earlier on, but they kind of crossed paths briefly because Triple H was on his way out and Big Show was on his way in, and I think they met up at the power plant. So pretty interesting that Triple H and Big Show kind of knew each other from WCW days. They had also repackaged Triple H around halfway into his run. I guess they liked his middle name. Triple H tells the story about how Ric Flair was doing the booking back then, and he said, hey, your last name's Levesque or whatever. We think that's cool. It sounds French. So we're going to give you this French gimmick, and you have to talk in an accent, and you're going to be a snob and all this crap. And that's really all he told him. And from there, it was up to Triple H to come up with the rest of the gimmicks. So, he came up with what you saw back then with Jean-Paul Levesque. And it was very much like his Hunter Hearst Helmsley character, which would happen in the WWE in just a short amount of time. They even teamed him up with William Regal. They were going to have a run with the tag straps and all of this. And that's when Triple H's contract was up, and they replaced Triple H, I believe, with Bobby Eaton. So now that his contract is up, naturally WCW is going to want to keep him. So he did get offered a new contract by WCW, probably for a lot more money. And his roll of the dice did pay off because he was going to be making more regardless. But he did give WWE a call and went up and had a meeting with Vince. And I like the story he tells here, too, because, again, it's a mentality that not many wrestlers probably had back then. I guarantee you Brutus Beefcake didn't ever think about shit like this. As he's up there talking to Vince McMahon, he says that Vince asks him why he wants to leave. Why do you want to leave WCW? And Triple H says, well, really, because of the shape WCW's in, they're kind of cutting out house shows. So all I'm going to be doing is TV. So I'm not going to be working nearly as much. I've got no opportunity to get better. I want to be the best. I want to work every night. I want to practice. And I can't do that if I'm just working 2 or 3 sets of TV tapings a month. It's not enough. So I guess that was enough to convince Vince to bring him in. And like I said, they did not veer too far off a course from his WCW gimmick. The only thing they did is, instead of making him French, they made him an American aristocrat, kind of a snob, just like he was in WCW, and changed his name to Hunter Hearst Helmsley. I remember being happy when he came in because I remember him from WCW. I would watch both shows, and I was really worried about the WWE. I mean, things were bad in 1995. WWE, it felt like they were fading a little bit, and they needed some talent. I mean, things were bleak in the WWE during those times. You had Brett, you had Shawn, you had Owen, you had Diesel, you had Razor. all wrestling hard, but your underneath guys there was not that much to look at. Even a mid-level talent like Jeff Jarrett was pretty valuable on the WWE's roster, and even he was on his way out of the WWE. So bringing Triple H in, I thought, was very necessary for the WWE, and I was happy he was there because he was a solid talent. I liked him. I was familiar with him because I had seen him in WCW. So I thought the guy had potential to be a pretty good heel in the WWE. Now, almost immediately after walking in the door of the WWE, he joins up with The Click. Now, there's been several stories over the years of how these guys got together. I've heard it told different ways. The story Triple H gives in the DVD is different from the story I've heard him tell before. I've heard Triple H tell a story before that he was the one that approached The Click as far as riding with him and hanging out with him and shit like that. So in the DVD, however, Triple H says that as soon as he got on his first loop or whatever, he's renting a car and a big van pulls up and honks the horn. It's the entire Click, and they're like, jump in with us. And I've heard Sean Waltman tell a story, too, about the Click basically gobbling him up right away. So I think the story basically goes that it was the Click that did approach him. But, you know, the stories are conflicted. But anyway, who the fuck cares how they got together? It happened pretty quick was the point. And once he jumped in the van with them, they immediately hit it off. He was even put over by guys like Diamond Dallas Page, who was friends with Nash from their WCW days. And he called him up and said, hey, there's a great guy heading up there. You should take him under your wing because he's solid. He loves the business. He doesn't drink. He doesn't smoke. He doesn't do drugs. He doesn't do anything. So the Click viewed that as an opportunity to have a designated driver because the four of them were fucked up constantly. So if you had someone to drive their drunk, pilled up asses around, that was going to probably save their lives. The Click had a ton of heat, though. Lex Luger, I think, is credited with giving them the name The Click. And if they didn't have enough heat as it was about to get a lot worse because right around the corner came the curtain call. I've spoken on the curtain call several times in the past. I've always felt like there was a few discrepancies with it. You know, I always hear the story about how pissed off everybody was. And I can definitely see how they would be pissed off because things were a little bit different in 1996, but not that much different. It wasn't, I think it would have been a lot worse if it was 1976 or 1986 even. By 1996, the cat was pretty much out of the bag. And if you notice, for all the old-timers that were pissed off, kicking and screaming and throwing things backstage, what was the entire crowd of Madison Square Garden doing? They were erupting. They were marking the fuck out. It was probably one of the loudest moments in Madison Square Garden history when all of the fans realized what the hell these guys were doing. So how can you be so pissed off with something that obviously worked? And with as bad as WWE was at the time, they needed that sort of buzz. And they pretty much got it. That one video camera footage that exists of the curtain call, that still image of the four of them hugging, that was on the cover of every magazine during July of 1996 and June of 1996, right after this happened. To me, it was over as shit. WWE should have ran with it. It just wasn't the right time. It was almost like they were a year away from it. But it was still, it really just pissed a lot of people off. Wrestlers, A, they broke kayfabe. They're fucking up the business. C, they don't care about anybody but themselves. They're selfish. They just don't give a fuck. You know, I can see where their anger is coming from completely. Totally, I can see their side. But at the same time, I want them to realize that it was 1996. And I think people were acting as if it was the 70s or 80s. It wasn't. Times were changing. They weren't the way they are now, but things were starting to happen around this time. And I think the WWE and all of the old-timers there, the Pat Pattersons, the Gerald Briscoes, Jim Cornettes, guys like that, you know, I think that they might have overreacted. And yes, although they had a valid argument, you know, to me, it was something that was a good moment for sports entertainment. It was a good moment for wrestling. Those fans fucking loved it. And we all know, as I've mentioned many times in the past, had that curtain call not taken place, because you got to look back at it now and say, thank God that it did, because if the curtain call never happened, we might not have got Stone Cold. Triple H was going to win the King of the Ring that year, not Austin. Without Austin winning the King of the Ring, you get no Austin 316 promo, you get no Austin 316 t-shirt. Now, I think Austin was over enough that he would have became a star anyway, but maybe not to the level that he did. I think a lot that happened during King of the Ring 1996 and what went on that night with him and Jake the Snake Roberts played a big role with him getting over as much as he did. And without the curtain call and Triple H's punishment, that wouldn't have happened. Now, the discrepancies that I alluded to earlier on is something else that I've discussed in the past. Now, the story goes that a ton of heat was dumped on the Click, but Scott Hall and Kevin Nash weren't going to get any of it because that was their last night. They were heading to WCW. Shawn Michaels could not get any of it because he was the WWE World Champion. WWE really couldn't do anything to Shawn Michaels, so that left Triple H, low man on the totem pole. He had to take all of it. Now, what I've always had a problem with, now I have no doubt that Triple H got punished. Triple H tells the story about how he had to go into Vince McMahon's office, and Vince McMahon, all of the Click members said that Vince gave the okay to do it. The problem was, I don't think Vince thought it all the way through and realized that it was really going to make him look bad. And he even said that in the meeting. Triple H said, Vince told him, he goes, I know I said it was okay, but now all this shit happened and it's blowing up in my face and, you're going to have to get punished here. But looking back, there's no way Vince McMahon was going to fire Triple H, because imagine if he did. You know what Triple H would do? He would go right down to WCW with Scott Hall and Kevin Nash and cut the most hardcore fucking promos on Vince McMahon you've probably ever heard. It would make the war even that much more heated, and imagine the strength of the NWO adding him to the mix. What if instead of Kevin Nash and Scott Hall invading WCW, what if it was Hall, Nash, and Triple H? So really, Vince had to know that, say, okay, if I fire this guy, all he's going to do is go down to WCW and completely trash me. He's going to weaken my roster, and he's going to strengthen theirs. So there's no way he was going to get released, but he basically said, you're going to have to eat plates and plates of shit, which was a direct quote from Vince McMahon, according to Triple H. What I've never gotten is that really all this pertains to are house shows. Triple H just basically had to lose and job on every show. He was already jobbing to Mark Marrow before the curtain call even happened. Vince McMahon loved Mark Marrow. I think Vince McMahon loved him from his Johnny B. Bad days in WCW. And he always wanted to get his hands on him. And I always thought of Mark Marrow when he came into the WWE as maybe Vince's replacement for Macho Man Randy Savage. Because if you think after Marrow had been there a while and he won the Intercontinental title, he started wearing the big sparkly robes instead of just the black boots, the black trunks, and the black vest, sound familiar, that he was wearing when he was just plain old Wild Man Mark Marrow. Then he got a little bit flashier, still kept the Wildman name, but wore the more glittery robes. And then Sable was coming out wearing evening gowns instead of the black leather that she was wearing before. So I thought it was like Vince McMahon's replacement for Macho Man and Elizabeth. And I could always tell with the way Mark Marrow was featured on TV, the way Vince McMahon talked about him in commentary, I could tell that Vince liked Marrow more than he liked Triple H. And Marrow had debuted at WrestleMania 12 right after Triple H jobbed in like 10 seconds to the Ultimate Warrior, also before the curtain call. And then he gets his ass kicked by Mark Marrow backstage during an interview. So Triple H was just, when it came to the battle between him and Mark Marrow, he was coming out on the losing end of it way before the curtain call. And I think he lost to him again on many, many house shows after that. So basically, he only went on a losing streak for about 3 months, maybe at the most. So it's not like it was a year-long punishment. WWE has always made it sound like the hog pen match was the consequences of the curtain call, but that was another match that Triple H looked like shit in, literally, because he was rolling around in shit. And again, that happened months before the curtain call ever did. So it's not like Triple H was really viewed that highly in the WWE. He looked like shit and was jobbing for months before the curtain call. Now, finally, that would change in October. After he did his jobs on the house shows for a couple of months, they finally give it back to him, and he gets to avenge all of those losses to Mark Marrow with that great angle on Monday Night Raw, one of my favorite Monday Night Raws of that time period. And that was when they were teasing the return to the ring of Mr. Perfect, and Mr. Perfect started feuding with Triple H on TV. They built to a big one-on-one match on Monday Night Raw, Curt Hennig, Mr. Perfect's return to the ring, and the whole thing was a swerve and a really nice, I think brilliant idea. Even though we lost out on the match that was advertised for, I was still really happy with what I saw. They have Triple H supposedly attack Mr. Perfect in the backstage area, rendering him unable to compete in the match. He comes out and announces this and brings Mark Marrow and Sable out with him. Now, Mark Marrow is the reigning Intercontinental Champion at the time and says, Mark Marrow is going to take my place, that way we don't rob the fans of a match. And Triple H is like, no, this is bullshit. I've got a contract to wrestle you. I'm not getting in the ring with him unless he puts his title on the line. And then, of course, they have the match. I think Mr. Perfect runs in, nails Mark Marrow with a chair, turns heel. Triple H wins the Intercontinental Champion, and they align him with Mr. Perfect. And I thought it was going to be a really good partnership. Unfortunately, it lasted just a couple of weeks. Mr. Perfect just up and left for WCW right in the middle of this, right after it happened. And I remember being so disappointed because I was like, oh, that might have been a fun team to watch, the two of them. It kind of reminded me of, I don't know, maybe Ric Flair and Mr. Perfect back in the 90s when Ric Flair was in the WWE. So to see Mr. Perfect back in that role, accompanying a wrestler to the ring and elevating a guy like Triple H just by association, I thought was going to be fantastic. So I was really bummed out when he left, and I felt like Hunter Hearst Helmsley was left with nothing. I even remember at Survivor Series, it was like the first show right after Curt Hennig left, and when he came out for his match, whatever match he was in, I remember the announcer saying things like, oh, he looks a little less than perfect, and shit like that. So WWE just briefly acknowledged that Curt Hennig had took off, and they moved right along. And Triple H mentions in the DVD that it really sucked when Mr. Perfect left because at that point, Vince really wanted to stick him with somebody. He wanted him with a heater. And Mr. Perfect was a great choice. Now that he's gone, they still felt the need to team him up with somebody. And I don't know if you guys remember this, but do you remember the brief time that Mr. Hughes accompanied him to the ring? It was from December to January. December of 96 to January of 1997. It lasted literally about 7-8 weeks at the most. I remember Mr. Hughes being there at the Royal Rumble, and then after that, I don't remember seeing him again. So I guess they decide to dump that idea, and that's when Chyna comes into the picture. Now, they talk a lot about Chyna in the DVD, which is nice. Now, obviously, later on, Triple H doesn't get into too much detail about his romantic relationship with her, but they talk a lot about how they got her into the WWE. And Shawn and Triple H have both told the story many times, but I guess they met Chyna, I don't know, at a gym or somewhere like that. She was also trained by Killer Kowalski, and she just looked amazing, and they thought to themselves that it would be perfect if she came in and was Triple H's bodyguard. And Vince McMahon thought it was the stupidest idea ever. They're like, come on, if you want a heater with Triple H, if you want to give these people a reason to boo this guy, give him a woman as his bodyguard. Can you imagine that? And it amazes me that it even took Vince so long, because everybody always said that Vince wanted nothing to do with it, and it took him weeks of convincing. Like, come on, how stupid can you be? Bring her in. Imagine how great this is going to be. And finally, after enough people were on board with it, they convinced Vince to do it, and it turned out to be great. I remember when she debuted and she shook Marlena all around like a rag doll. It was awesome, and plus she was believable. It wasn't like Sable powerbombing Mark Marrow. This woman was legitimately jacked, and she was body slamming men on the outside of the ring. She was awesome. As much as I dislike Chyna, as much as I think she's a fucking piece of shit and a complete mess, back then, when she was young and ambitious and didn't have all of her problems, man, she was impressive. They talk about him winning the King of the Ring in 1997, and Triple H mentions how he really came full circle. He learned a lot in that year, starting with his punishment after the curtain call and coming all the way around the next year and winning the King of the Ring like he was supposed to the year before, and which also moved him into a really intense feud with Mick Foley. And Triple H talks very highly of Mick Foley in this documentary, which was really nice to hear. I've never really heard Triple H put over Mick Foley this hard before, so it was really nice to know that Triple H at least acknowledges that Mick Foley really helped him along and helped him evolve his character, because during this time of their feud in the summer of 1997, they had a few really brutal matches which were things you weren't seeing from Triple H at that time. When Triple H won the King of the Ring, remember, he smashed the crown all over Mick Foley's head. They had, I think, they had like a Falls Count Anywhere in your house match, and then they had a cage match at SummerSlam. And all of these matches really helped show a tougher side of Triple H. Mick Foley, you already knew, was nuts, but Triple H, we'd only seen that proper American blue blood type of gimmick, and you hadn't seen him really get very vicious or this aggressive, and this feud with Mick Foley really helped him along. And not only did he develop a toughness, but he also developed a little bit of an attitude, and he was sort of breaking away from that whole gimmick because he was kind of handcuffed, which is what Triple H said. I think Mick Foley said the same thing in the DVD, that having a gimmick like that will handcuff you sometimes, and for him to be able to break out of that and start developing his own personality and becoming really who he is in real life more than he is his character that he has been portraying. And it was all during 1997 that all of this started happening, and that's when he finally was able to team up with his real-life buddy, Shawn Michaels. Now, this would have been around September of 1997. I remember the first time seeing them together was like that tag match with Mick Foley and The Undertaker, and I think Shawn busted Undertaker open with a chair, and it was the first time we had seen Hunter and Shawn really together on TV. And it was another one of those situations, like so many times with Vince, he just doesn't get it right away. And they had to really push the issue with him to finally convince him to allow them to do this. He was against groups and factions and all of that. He didn't think it would be good, or for whatever reason, where a lot of other people were saying, no, this actually might be a good idea. This is the time to do it. The timing is perfect in wrestling, in society, to have a group like this, juvenile bunch of assholes. This should be perfect. It's going to be great. Finally, Vince allows them to do it, and they show just a shit ton of their footage from the original DX days from late 1997, early 1998. They showed all the great and hilarious shit that they did, all the way down to the press conference where they read the letter from the USA Network, like literally read it and said all the dirty words, and they bleeped it on Raw, and it was really funny. And they said after that, even the USA Network was on board. Finally, after it took that, I guess, for people to realize what they were actually doing. And USA Network had to know that over on the other channel, you've got the NWO and
WWE was really not that cool and hip yet. And this DX gimmick and this DX faction with Shawn and Triple H, everything that they're doing, this was exactly what the WWE needed to compete with the NWO. And finally, after a couple of months, everybody's on board with it. But then Shawn Michaels leaves, and they get into this next. Now, Shawn, of course, we remember his situation. After WrestleMania 14, he took off, had back surgery. He had all sorts of personal problems. He was addicted to drugs. He was just a son of a bitch. So he just needed to go away. And when you think about how popular DX was, Triple H, up until this point, he was the sidekick. Shawn Michaels was the leader. Triple H mentions in the documentary that they were probably just going to pull the plug on the whole thing. What's the point of doing it if Shawn is gone? Well, they eventually allowed Triple H to keep the group going. Triple H was now going to seize this opportunity because with Shawn gone, a spot has opened up, and he gets to take control of DX, and he had a chance. He says, I had one chance to make this work. And that first night on Raw, it's another one of my favorite Raws of all time, the night after WrestleMania 14. This is when you knew WCW was on the ropes. WWE, I still think, lost in the ratings that night. Even on a post-WrestleMania Raw, Nitro still beat them, but they beat them just barely. And I think it was the next week or the week after that Raw finally won with the Vince McMahon Stone Cold confrontation. But this Raw was so memorable, and I loved Triple H coming out there and, severing ties with Shawn Michaels. You drop the ball, I'm picking it up, I'm going to run with it tonight, I'm going to form the DX Army, and the first guy that's going to join my army is a fellow Click member defecting from WCW, X-Pac. And then, of course, later on in the night, they added the Outlaws, which they had already been teasing. I actually thought the Outlaws might join DX when Shawn Michaels was still in the group because they had tag teamed a couple of times, and I think the four of them beat up the LOD one week on Raw. So it seemed to me that they were teasing that the Outlaws would eventually be members of DX anyway. So the fact that they came out there in the main event, and by they, I mean X-Pac and Triple H, because the Outlaws had the match with Terry and Cactus in the cage on Raw. DX comes out and interferes. The four of them just beat the holy hell out of Funk and Cactus Jack, and the new DX Army is formed. It was an amazing Raw. And he hit a home run, which was a direct quote from Triple H from the DVD. He goes, we just hit it out of the park. It was unbelievable. And the dynamic of the group even changed. Shawn's group was a heel. These guys eventually became babyface. They were only, after this beatdown of Cactus Jack and Terry Funk, they were really only heels for a couple of more weeks. And then they just naturally turned babyface. The fans loved them. I was there the night in Hampton, Virginia, when WWE had a Raw, and it was when DX invaded Nitro. And I'll never forget that, being in the arena, watching it on the Titantron, because those of you who've been to WWE shows, the audio can be funny, especially back in those days. I haven't been to a show in nearly 10 years, so I'm sure now, the quality is probably much better for the live crowd. But back then, in the early days of the Titantron, a lot of times it was hard to hear everything if there was a promo on the screen or whatnot. So the fact that these guys are outside of the building and I'm watching, I'm like, what the fuck is DX doing? And then I hear Triple H say WCW, and I'm like, no, he didn't just say WCW. He didn't say Nitro. I knew where Nitro was because I knew some people that was over at that show as well, and it was right down the road. So I was like, holy shit, what the fuck? Is there going to be an invasion here? Something. I almost could not believe what I was hearing, and I was chalking it up to the bad audio until I looked at the armbands of the DX members, and I see WPO WCW on the armbands. I'm like, holy shit. So I got to watch that whole thing unfold from the live crowd on the Titantron. It was a very surreal moment. All of the fans' jaws in that arena had dropped. And again, they show not only this, but all of the other great footage from the Babyface DX group. They featured a lot of it on this DVD. And then they got into the feud with the Nation of Domination. Now, I remember this. They talk a lot about how The Rock and Triple H's careers really paralleled each other because they were feuding for the Intercontinental title before either one of them were in a faction. And now they're both leaders of these factions, clashing for the Intercontinental title again. And then months and years later, they would feud for the world title and basically be two of the top guys in the WWE every year for the foreseeable future. So they really, I think, fed off each other. I think they motivated each other because they were both trying to outdo each other, and they were basically vying and jockeying for the same spot. And I think it's really cool the way those guys had their careers, go in the similar directions that they did. Everybody's talked about maybe some animosity between The Rock and Triple H. There might be. I think deep down these guys like each other just fine. But they were so competitive with each other back in the day, you got to wonder if there's some jealousy on either side. I don't think The Rock has anybody on planet Earth to be jealous of. of. I don't think The Rock ever has any desire to be Triple H, but when you think about how the two of them succeeded and where The Rock wound up dominating Hollywood and where Triple H wound up dominating the wrestling business, as in he is going to be the next Vince McMahon, you can't get any higher than what Triple H did. They both succeeded equally in their profession. Rock broke away to do movies and reached the top. Triple H decided to stay in wrestling and he reached the top, literally the top. And it all dates back to some of those early matches in 1998, and they talk a lot about it. The Rock was also interviewed for this DVD, by the way. It looked like some older footage, probably done several years back, but he talks a lot about the significance of those matches for the Intercontinental title and the feud with the Nation of Domination and DX, culminating the Intercontinental title feud with the ladder match at Madison Square Garden at SummerSlam. All of their matches were great. Now, they kind of just fast forward through the rest of 1998 because Triple H got injured right after that ladder match, and he really wasn't even ever able to defend the Intercontinental title at all because I think he had knee surgery when he was out for several months. So when he returned, he picked things back up with DX, but by then, we're talking late 1998, early 1999, and now the rumblings are starting to come along that Triple H is going to be leaving DX. And he mentions how nobody in DX wanted it to end. Everybody came up to him individually, X-Pac, Road Dogg Billy, come on, what are you doing? This is great. This is so over. And you have to look at it from their point of view. To them, DX is the greatest thing that's ever happened to them. They don't have the ability to go further like Triple H does. Triple H wanted from day one to be the man in the business. And so the only way he's going to be able to do that is to go out and be fully singles, feud for the World Heavyweight title, and stop messing around with this juvenile group. He needed to evolve. He needed to move on. Where the other guys, they needed DX to be successful. So I can see why X-Pac and the Outlaws did not want the group to end because, to them, they were killing it. They were making money. Triple H just had his eye on a bigger prize. They talk about how his sit-down interview with Jim Ross, I think in the summer of 1999, really helped put him on the map. Or at least it was a really significant interview as far as it was basically a shoot. When you go back and look at it, he definitely was still bitter about how he was punished. Now that 3 years had gone by and he is a secure roster spot and he knows he's about to get the title, he's secure in himself so he can come out and say, God damn it, that pissed me off that you made me eat all that shit years ago just because I wanted to go out and show solidarity with my friends in Madison Square Garden, and you made me eat shit for it and it pissed me off and I'm still pissed off about it, and now I'm going to use this as motivation to plow through all the WWE talent on my way to becoming the man here anyway, so fuck you basically. So he was pissed. And also, in a really interesting part of the DVD, they acknowledge the controversy around SummerSlam 1999. I've talked about SummerSlam 1999 before. Some of you might remember. It's one of my few criticisms of Stone Cold. I've said many times, as much as I admire the man, he's not perfect, he's not a saint. And this is one of those situations where, how ironic that everybody accuses Triple H of holding people back and never jobbing and this and that. They were about to launch Triple H in the summer of 1999. Mick Foley himself on the documentary says, I just kept my mouth shut and I didn't ask any questions, but I definitely found it strange that I was even involved in this match, and the one-on-one match that was planned between Triple H and Stone Cold turned into a three-way with me involved, and instead of Triple H winning the title at SummerSlam and launching him, I beat Steve for the title, and then Triple H beat me the next night on Raw. What the fuck's that about? Triple H said that Stone Cold had hurt his knee, and he legitimately was hurt around this time. I think he did take some time off shortly after this. But still, I think that was more of an excuse. He just didn't want to drop it to Triple H. Bottom line, that's what it was. He didn't want to drop it to a guy that wasn't proven on the main stage yet. Triple H, I thought everybody knew how over he was, but he had not been world champion yet. And I think Austin was a little nervous to lose to a guy that maybe if it didn't work out and he turned out to be a shit champion and WWE never went with him again, that it would make Austin look bad or something like that. So it just goes to show you how everybody protects themselves. Everybody. Stone Cold doesn't get 1/1,000,000th of the heat that a guy like Triple H gets. You know why? Because people like Stone Cold and he was over. A guy like Triple H, they accentuate all of his negatives and they say nothing about his positives. When you look at things, Stone Cold's is the one who's got the run-ins with the law here. Stone Cold's the one that put the brakes on potentially a guy's huge launching at SummerSlam 1999. Now, Triple H in the documentary says, hey, no big deal. Everything worked out. Look where I'm sitting right now, right? So there's no hard feelings. feelings. Triple H and Stone Cold, I believe, are dear friends, but still, this was fucking shady, and this was something I think that Austin, he was wrong. The WWE for months, you could tell the way things were going. When Triple H left DX, you knew he was going to get a run with the belt, and the planned match, was at SummerSlam. Jesse Ventura was even the referee for this thing. They could have protected Austin. They could have had Ventura fuck up, or they could have had Jesse turn heel even. I don't know. Something happened to where Triple H ends up winning the title, and Austin could have been protected. I have no idea why they felt they had to add Mick Foley to the mix, take away Triple H's SummerSlam title victory, and give it to him the next night on Raw. It was just a little bit of a letdown. Even the 3 count and when he won, and Shane is with him and everything, it just seemed like, yes, it was exciting. Triple H was definitely selling it, but you could tell it just fell a little bit flat. I think it would have been better if it would have taken place at the pay-per-view. And I think it's really cool that they acknowledge that in the DVD. They also talk about his relationship with Stephanie. Now, they go pretty in detail as far as how they got together, showing the wedding in Vegas with the angle with Test, and all of the things that they were doing on TV. They tell stories, or Stephanie told a story in the DVD about how it was their mothers that both kind of suspected something was up. They talked about how Vince had given them his blessing at first and then took it away. They had a lot of wrestlers talking about how they were suspecting things, and there was rumors. It was kind of like junior high. Some people would see them making out, and they'd be like, oh my God, Stephanie and Triple H are making out. Triple H told a really cool story about a conversation he had with Undertaker about it, and how Undertaker laid it down flat for him and was brutally honest and says, hey, do what you want, but you have to understand that if you go through with this and this relationship works out and you guys are together, there's going to be an asterisk by everything you do for the rest of your career. And when you look at it from that perspective, everybody says, oh, Triple H, he just married the boss's daughter to get in good and to make it far in this business and everything like that. Maybe there's a little bit of truth to that, but I think the bigger truth is Triple H didn't know going into this if it was going to work out with Stephanie, and I think he did truly put a lot on the line. They talk about that in the DVD, because if things didn't work out or if it went badly in any way, it could have huge consequences on Triple H's career. He could be out of a job, and WCW was about to be out of business, so there was nowhere else for Triple H to go. His entire livelihood was on the line simply because he really liked this girl and he wanted to be with her. I can definitely see how people would consider that romantic, because it is. I mean, everything he worked for, he wanted to be a wrestler for his whole life. He gets to the top, and then he's putting the whole thing on the line for a relationship, and a lot of relationships don't work out. So the odds of it working out were probably pretty slim at the time, but he took the risk anyway. And you have to admire the man for that. Now, one thing I will say about this story is they didn't mention Chyna at all. Never mentioned her name once during the entire time they were talking about Stephanie and Triple H, because really, Triple H and Chyna were kind of together. I mean, he basically more or less cheated on her or dumped her for Stephanie McMahon, basically. So there was a lot of weirdness there as well. And Vince was on the documentary talking about how, Triple H has got to understand, what he's got on the line here and this and that. I'm surprised none of them had any problem with him possibly cheating on his current girlfriend. So not surprisingly, really, the WWE really didn't get into that, but that's okay. It's almost too funny to look back on now. I mean, I just think years later we're going to laugh. Triple H is never going to live this down. I mean, you have to look at who he was with before Stephanie McMahon. He was with Chyna, who at no point in her career or her life did I ever find her the least bit attractive at all. I thought for sure when she first came in, she had a penis. After she got the plastic surgery done, she looked a little bit scary. I think the hottest she ever was when she was in the Playboy magazines, but still, not really my type. So I've just really never found anything attractive about Chyna at all. And then, of course, when she broke away from WWE and left them and then became such a mess, in the mainstream media and did pornos, and she's fucking drug addicted and she looks like shit and she's a moron. It's just like, oh my God, Triple H, could you have possibly a worse ex-girlfriend to haunt you for life now that you're going to be the CEO of the WWE one day? You're going to be the next Vince McMahon. I'm sure Vince McMahon himself has fucked around with some dirty girls earlier on in his life, but at least they're not as visible as someone like Chyna is. So Triple H, he's probably just at this point constantly ribbed about it. He wasn't with Chyna all that long, and so they only dated for a couple of years, so it's not like they were married with kids and he screwed her over and left her for Stephanie. It's not like that. They just dated for a while, but I just can't believe that they dated at all. Now, before we go any further, it just dawned on me that I haven't even talked about the DVD extras and matches yet, so I'm going to go ahead and get that out of the way now. Now, as usual, you guys all know me, I don't have any Blu-rays, and apparently, in this particular DVD, I looked up the Blu-ray extras before I did this commentary, and holy shit, is there a lot of extra stuff that is not included in the basic 3 DVD set that I have. So if you're going to buy one of these and you want to see a lot of the extra shit, I might recommend the Blu-ray. It definitely looks much more interesting, but I'm only going to talk about what's on the 3 DVD set. It seemed to me like the WWE was trying to put more matches on this DVD that might not be on other DVDs because they didn't really include what I would consider to be Triple H's greatest matches. They just included a random selection of matches. And I'm guessing the reason for that is so many of the classic Triple H matches are already on other DVDs. You know, like Randy Orton DVDs and Shawn Michaels DVDs and Undertaker DVDs. So maybe they were trying to keep this a little bit original. I don't know, but the match selection to me seemed a little bit strange. But here's some of the matches you get. You get a good match from WCW Saturday Night 1994 between Jean-Paul Levesque and Ricky Steamboat. That one's really interesting to watch. One of his matches with Mick Foley, they included the match from One Night Only in September of 1997 with Dude Love. And again, you know, they just had so many better matches than that. They could have put their SummerSlam match, they could have put their King of the Ring match, even that Raw match they had, remember? When Mick Foley came out as Cactus Jack in Madison Square Garden for the first time, any of those would have been better than this one. Here's a match they picked, right? The Iron Man match, Judgment Day 2000 against The Rock. That was one of my favorite Iron Man matches of all time, possibly even my favorite. You know, my loyalty just goes out to Brett and Shawn, but really, The Rock and Triple H had a lot more going on, and I felt like I was more on the edge of my seat during that match than I was during the WrestleMania 12 Iron Man match. But still, I love Brett and Shawn so much, I'm never going to go against that match. But it was good to see them include the one from The Rock and Triple H because that was a great night. And a super hot crowd, too. Remember Undertaker returned and all that? Triple H regained the title. That was awesome. They also include the no disqualification match between Kurt Angle and Triple H from Unforgiven of that same year. I loved that feud between Kurt Angle and Triple H. I remember when they were teasing the sexual tension between Kurt Angle and Stephanie, and you could sense there was going to be an affair, and they never really went any further with it because it abruptly ended because they decided to make Triple H the guy that was behind Austin's hit and run, and just as Triple H was starting to get over as a babyface and feud with this evil little prick Kurt Angle who's trying to take his wife, he turns heel anyway and starts feuding with Austin. So the whole thing was cut short, but I thought it was going to be really good. In a match that I don't even remember taking place, I should take a look at it. It was Raw from February of 2006, Triple H versus Ric Flair. The one they had in Greenville, South Carolina a few years earlier was really good, and they had the tribute to Ric Flair after the show went off the air. That was awesome, but they included this one from 2006 for some reason. Also in another match that I really didn't like, his return match at SummerSlam 2007 against Booker T. He had just come off that other quad injury. He was back, and he was going to be basically burying Booker T because he was going to leave and go to TNA. And to me, the match wasn't even that good. I don't know, just to have Triple H come back in that way. WWE went on a stretch there where like 4 or 5 SummerSlams in a row completely sucked. And I just felt like kind of this was one of them. And this was Triple H's big return. Definitely not the same type of reaction he got in 2002 when he returned from the first quad injury. I mean, people were cheering him. He was over. He was a babyface. But, you know, him just coming back and beating Booker T, there was nothing shocking or nothing surprising or, you know, nothing at all there in that match. I just didn't enjoy it. They include another one of his title victories. Pretty sure he won the belt in this match. This was No Mercy. In October of that year, he had a last man standing match with Randy Orton. A non-title match between Jeff Hardy and Triple H from SmackDown of 2008 is also on here. I remember the one they had on SmackDown in like 2001 when Hardy beat him for the Intercontinental title. That was awesome. And in yet another match that I just don't remember, I should actually take a look at it. Raw, November 2009, Triple H versus Chris Jericho. So that's the matches they give you on the DVD. Like I said, the Blu-ray seems to be chock full of a lot of great shit, so that might be the one you want to check out. Do not buy this DVD if you just want to collect matches. Buy this DVD for the documentary because the matches are kind of shit. So getting back to the documentary now, we last left off with Triple H and Stephanie getting together. They actually fast forward and talk about them getting married in October of 2003. And they showed a lot of footage from the wedding as well, which I've always found cool. I've only seen bits and pieces of it, but if you look at it, it looks like it was filmed by WWE's camera crew. They had several different camera angles of the vows and a lot of shit from the reception and the entire ceremony, really. Looked like it was a lot of fun. Vince McMahon said it was the greatest wedding he had ever been to, so it was definitely looked like a beautiful ceremony. ceremony, and they showed a little bit of the footage from it, which was cool. Now they rewind. They actually now go back after talking about the wedding. They're now talking about the feud between The Rock and Triple H in the year 2000. So their rivalry when Austin was on the shelf injured was huge in the WWE in those days, and Rock and Triple H both talk about how important those matches were and how good they made each other because of, again, going back to, dating back to their earlier feuds a few years earlier, there was this natural rivalry, a little bit of animosity between the two because they're both vying for the same position, and they've really, really paralleled each other, and that was no more apparent than here in the year 2000 when they're feuding for the world title. They put each other over pretty huge in the DVD. Both guys acknowledged that they wouldn't be the same without the other one, and that the feuds that they had throughout the years really helped motivate each other, and they both really credit each other as being big parts and big influences in their careers, which was really cool. This is getting to the part of the DVD now where things really start to speed up because they actually left out a lot, which I really enjoyed this DVD, like I said, but if it was up to me, there's a few more things I would talk about, and they really fast-forwarded through a lot of shit. They didn't talk at all about his alliance with Stone Cold or him turning heel when it turned out that he was the one that orchestrated Austin's hit and run. They didn't show any of that stuff. They basically just fast-forwarded to May of 2001 and Triple H's quad injury that he suffered on Raw in the big tag match with him and Stone Cold versus Jericho and Benoit. They went into pretty big detail about it, showed a lot of hospital footage, talked about how crazy it was that he was even able to finish the match because he had been going pretty hard, and he had even said in previous interviews and DVDs that he feels like the reason he got injured was just because he was going so hard and his body just said, enough, you need to chill out for a while. And you could see that's where it was going too, because at the time I remember Austin had just turned heel at WrestleMania 17, and for the first time ever, I think a lot of the fans, a lot of the smarter fans started to respect Triple H a little bit more than Austin. People started appreciating his wrestling ability, even though he had been such a dastardly heel, even though he was such an evil son of a bitch months prior to this, the fans were getting behind him. And since Austin was a heel anyway and was doing a great job of getting booed by the fans, a guy that over, the fans really didn't have a problem booing him when he became such an asshole. And I think for a brief period there, Triple H was a little bit more over than Stone Cold. And I could see it coming that eventually Triple H was going to turn babyface, and it was going to be him and Austin for the title. They would both be involved in the invasion angle and all of that. There was going to be some great shit lying ahead. But unfortunately, this injury cut it all short. Triple H went down for what would be the entire rest of the year. He would miss the invasion. He would miss all of it. And they showed a lot of footage from him moving to Birmingham. I remember them talking about that years ago as well. He actually moved down there and stayed there because he was just so determined to get back. He didn't want to go back home and have to make trips back and forth or have to visit a local physical therapist. He wanted to stay down there with the best. And I remember also around this time, this is when I really knew something was up with Triple H and Stephanie, because the rumors and the dirt sheets and the hotlines around that time, people were speculating, but the cat was not completely out of the bag at this point because they had not been together that long. Most fans just had a feeling that something was going on, and I think the rumors were out there. But when they were showing the footage of Stephanie at the hospital talking about Triple H and watching him on the monitor get surgery, and she was legitimately crying. And I remember saying to myself, you know what, Stephanie is too young in this business to be that good of an actress. She legitimately cares about him, and they were still playing it up for TV, like, because she was his on-screen wife or whatever. So that's why she was there to begin with, was because they just weren't breaking kayfabe, really. She was sticking with her on-screen character, but you could tell there was something there because she was visibly in tears, and there's no way she could have acted that well at that time in the WWE. There's no way. And I remember specifically saying to myself, yep, there's something going on. Now, after all of those months of rehabilitation, they show his comeback. June 7th, 2002, Madison Square Garden, Monday Night Raw. I will never forget this show. It's the loudest fucking pop I've ever heard. To this day, I don't think anybody's beat it. And this is exactly what I was talking about. You could smell this coming before he even got hurt. The fans were really starting to get behind Triple H, even when he was a heel. And Triple H says in the DVD, he goes, I was the most hated guy in the business when I got hurt. And I came back to the biggest pop this industry has ever heard. And he's right. And I've always reverted back to that as one of the examples about how fickle fans can be, because they bowed down and kissed that man's feet when he came back. They were so happy to see him back. And then yet, just a year later, after Triple H wins a couple of world titles, all of a sudden, oh, he's a piece of shit who holds everybody back, and he only gets his opportunity because he's married to the boss's daughter. Same fucking people thought he was the greatest thing in the world in 2002 when he returned. So I just never understood sometimes the fans' mentality, how they can love a guy one day and then claim that he's been the worst thing to ever happen to wrestling another day. It just doesn't make any sense. And they pretty much showed his entire entrance that night on the DVD. just showed the music hitting, the crowd erupting, him coming down to the ring and cutting a promo, because that's all he did. It's not like he got in the ring that night. All he did was cut a promo, and I think he had a little tussle with Kurt Angle at the end of the show, because WWE, they had to have some sort of physicality with him coming back. But for the most part, it was just a promo saying, I'm back. And he was back bigger than ever. Remember how big he got because he was down there, and when you're in rehab and stuff and nursing injuries, sometimes you are given some steroids and shit. So I wouldn't be surprised if, it's a combination of just working out constantly and a little bit of that. Triple H came back in the most amazing shape I've ever seen anyone in. And in another disappointing move on the DVD, they fast forward through pretty much the entire year of 2002. They don't talk about WrestleMania 18. Well, they do. They mention that he won the Royal Rumble and that he won the world title at WrestleMania 18, but they didn't go into detail about it at all. They said nothing about his feud with Shawn Michaels. When Shawn Michaels returned and they had that great SummerSlam match, no mention of that, or the heel turn, or anything else he did in 2002 for that matter. They really just fast forward to the days of Evolution. He talks about how he pitched the idea to Ric Flair and Vince McMahon. He said he saw Ric Flair just sitting there in the stands one day before the show, and he just kind of looked pathetic, and he decided, hey, I should take this guy with me. What the hell are we doing with Flair? This is one of the greatest legends in the history of our business, and he's one of my idols. Let's put him with me. So he asked Vince if they could be teamed up. Vince said okay, and then he said, how about we form a group, and we get two young guys to team up with the two of us, and we can call ourselves Evolution. It can be Flair to me and the two of us to the two young guys. Eventually, the guys they decided on was Randy Orton and Batista. Mark Jindrak, I think, was one of the first ideas for Evolution. I'm pretty sure they even filmed vignettes with him involved. So they were all set to go with Mark Jindrak, but something happened. He either got released or I don't know what the fuck. But they changed their mind, went with Dave Batista, and the group became hugely successful. I liked Evolution. I thought it was a modern-day Four Horsemen for the time. I think that's what Triple H was going for. They definitely emulated those guys with the suits and the limos and the chicks and the champagne and all of that. I really enjoyed Evolution. I enjoyed him as a heel group because Triple H had so much heat, too, from all of the internet fans that fucking hated the guy because he's always on top. All this shit started around this time. 2003, Triple H was really hated, but I saw it as Triple H giving two young guys an opportunity. And when you look at the careers of Randy Orton and Batista, a lot of people throughout the careers of those two guys would say, yeah, they only got their spot because they're friends with Triple H. Look, no matter who was going to be in the group with Triple H, that's the way fans were going to feel about them. If Triple H and Ric Flair wanted to form a faction, Evolution, which was highly successful, which I legitimately enjoyed, no matter who the members of Evolution were going to be, if they got opportunities in the future, everybody would claim that the only reason they got them was because they were friends with Triple H. So you can't put all that on Randy Orton and Batista's shoulders. No matter who it was, those guys were going to get those opportunities, and it worked out with Randy Orton. He's great in the ring. I've always had Randy Orton's back. He's definitely not a perfect entertainer, but a third-generation guy, very athletic, very smooth, decent on the mic, vicious, and all around a pretty good athlete, I think is fine to have as a world champion. Batista, not so much my favorite guy in the ring, but he looks like $1 million, and he was big, he was powerful, and he looked like a professional wrestler. And these guys became multi-time WWE champions because of their association with Triple H, and Triple H put them both over. Or at least he put Batista over at first. He wouldn't put Randy Orton over for a couple of more years, but still, their association and their involvement in Evolution with Flair and Triple H really helped elevate them. And Triple H said that he told Vince, I'm going to make 2 stars by doing this. And that's what got Vince on board with the idea. Well, shit, we need new stars. And Evolution was the birth of 2 new stars in the WWE. Triple H was right. But again, they don't get that much in detail about it. I'm really surprised because there was a time period there, even though I just got done defending Triple H, that 03 to 04 time period was one of the worst in Triple H's legacy because that's when the fans really hated him. It really did truly seem like he was winning all of the time. The fans took it very seriously, much like they do John Cena now. Anytime he wins a match, the fucking earth explodes. So the WWE, I guess, didn't really want to talk about it. They didn't mention his victories over Booker T, or Rob Van Dam, or Kane in the Katie Vick situation, or him taking the title off of Randy Orton a month after he won it, or the absolute destruction of poor Eugene. Any of that shit, they didn't talk about it at all. But it's a shame because I would have really liked to hear Triple H's take on that, just to hear what he has to say about his criticisms during that time. Some fans really hated the way he was winning all the time. Goldberg, that's another guy I didn't mention, another guy that Triple H beat when they thought that Goldberg would beat him. him. So none of that was really discussed. And I think Triple H really was working hard during that time to build a similar legacy to Ric Flair. And I think he wanted to rack up as many world titles as possible. And he also wanted to have really long title reigns and really just be on top of the WWE in that douchebag suit-wearing heel position, much like Ric Flair did all those years in the NWA and WCW. I'm not sure if taking Vince McMahon's place was really on Triple H's mind during that time. I think taking Ric Flair's place was more on Triple H's mind. But it's too bad they didn't talk about it. And they fast forward even some more. They go a couple of more years here in the future, and they talk about his match with John Cena at WrestleMania 22. I have no idea why they chose to bring that up and ignore so much other shit, but they talk about his loss to John Cena, and then they talk about the reformation of D-Generation X. I liked some of the things they said in the DVD about DX. I was never a big DX reformation fan. To me, you could never recreate those days. And yes, Shawn Michaels and Triple H are together on the same roster once again. It would seem only natural that they should do something together, especially after they had feuded for so long throughout the 2000s. Putting them back together and reforming DX, yes, was awesome, but by this point, what can you do? And on top of that, WWE was on the verge of going PG. Shawn Michaels, of course, we all know, was born again, so there's some of the things that they used to do, obviously, he's not going to be able to do. So they basically just took a different take on DX. They made him still juvenile, centered a lot of it around comedy, and made sure that the fans knew, that Triple H and HBK knew that they were old, and they were way past their prime on doing this shit, and that was part of the fun. That's part of the reason why it was funny, because two 40-year-old guys are acting like they're 18. So to me, I found the humor in it. There was a few things they did that I did like, when they said Vince likes cock, and I used to love the things they would do to Shawn Michaels to get him off of the screen anytime there was going to be anything salacious on screen. The one clip they show is, I don't know what they're doing. There's some strippers there in a bikini. It's outside barbecue, and Triple H says, "Shawn, is that Mr. Fuji over there?" And Shawn Michaels goes, "Mr. Fuji, I love him," and just scurries off. And then two chicks in bikinis come out and do whatever. And when they're done, Shawn Michaels just walks back shaking his head. He goes, "Mr. Fuji wasn't over there." That shit always cracked me up. So little things that they did like that, they could get creative with it and to get Shawn off screen and basically, make fun of themselves in a lot of ways. So for that reason, I didn't have a huge problem with DX, but to me, it was never anything close to what it was before. Back in 1997, DX was a little more edgy. They were definitely a lot more violent. And then in 2006, it was fucking glow sticks. Now he gets hurt again. They talk about this. I think this happened right in the beginning of 2007, right? Because wasn't Triple H supposed to get a rematch with John Cena at WrestleMania 23? He ended up getting hurt, and Shawn Michaels took his place. They breezed through a lot of this, too. They fast forward to his return, I believe, at SummerSlam that year when he beat Booker T, and just a couple of months after that, he won the world title again. And he was eventually drafted to SmackDown, where he was having some really good matches and doing some really good things until finally, in 2009, they publicly acknowledged the marriage, the real-life marriage between Triple H and Stephanie McMahon when Triple H had his feud with Randy Orton. This was during WrestleMania 25. They started building this up to where Randy Orton RKO'd Stephanie, prompting Triple H to run out because he's a SmackDown guy, and this was like just him coming out there and running to the aid of his wife was letting the fans know, okay, this is my wife. Not only am I performing on SmackDown, but I'm also backstage in an executive role at every single show. I'm here. He runs out to protect his wife, and that was finally WWE's way of saying, okay, you guys already know it's the worst kept secret in the history of wrestling, but here it is. Now that you know, Triple H and Stephanie are together. Now, I loved the build for this feud. I think everybody did. The problem is the match sucked, and that's what they talked about so in detail on the documentary because they went through everything that happened. I mean, Randy Orton punted Vince McMahon. He beat up Shane McMahon. He DDT'd and RKO'd Stephanie. And Triple H even showed up at Randy Orton's house, remember, broke in, threw him through the window, beat the shit out of him, got arrested. It was just this horrendous feud that was just going to culminate in a bloody, brutal war. You have to know that. Well, for some reason, I don't even remember storyline-wise why they did this at the time. I guess because we are in a PG era, but they handcuffed the guys by adding stipulations to their match at WrestleMania. Triple H is going in as the champion, and if he gets counted out or disqualified, he will lose the WWE title. So how is Triple H supposed to have this war with Randy Orton and get his revenge and beat this guy into a bloody pulp for fucking with his family the way he did if they have to have it within the confines of a scientific wrestling match? It was impossible. There was no way that was going to work. And then when you combine that with the fact that they had to go on after the greatest wrestling match that ever took place. So they were going to be fucked regardless, but at least if there could be a little bit of violence in the match, that might at least give them a fighting chance to at least win back the crowd. But the whole match just was pathetic. It did not live up, and it was such a sorry-ass ending to what I thought was a great feud and a great build. And I don't understand what the WWE was thinking there. That was definitely a huge mistake. That match needed to involve chairs, tables, ring bells, knives, bazookas, machetes, you name it. It needed to be inside of a Hell in the Cell. It needed to be inside of a Hell in the Cell, inside of an Elimination Chamber, inside of a Punjabi prison match, with barbed wire and dogs and flames surrounding the entire thing. But instead, it was a straight-up match with a couple of stupid stipulations, and it failed miserably. It gets better, though. They move on to start talking about the set of matches he had with The Undertaker at WrestleMania. So they fast-forwarded a little bit more. They didn't talk about who he worked with at WrestleMania 26. I believe it was Sheamus. Now we're on to The Undertaker. They showed a little bit of footage from their first match at WrestleMania 27, which I thought was amazing. I hated WrestleMania 27. I thought it was a horrible pay-per-view, but it would have been even worse if we didn't have a great match like this. And I had to give so much credit to Triple H, because after what Shawn and Undertaker just got done doing, you got to remember, Triple H is a completely different type of worker than Shawn Michaels. So I was worried that Triple H and The Undertaker, how in the world could that possibly even compare to the matches that Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker had? Because Shawn Michaels is, a little bit more athletic. And since he's a little bit more athletic than Triple H, I thought it was going to make the matches more exciting. And I didn't know how Triple H and Undertaker were going to be able to follow that. But they did. And that's what I love about the old school style. And that's why I'm such an old school guy at heart, because you can still keep the fans on the edge of their seats simply by telling them a story. You don't need to do a fucking 450 splash. You don't need to do a moonsault through 3 tables. You just need to tell a story, and you just need to know what you're doing. And no two guys know what they're doing any better than Triple H and The Undertaker. And I remember thinking that match was awesome, and I love the story they told at the end. Undertaker won, but he has to be carried out of the building where Triple H, the loser, walks off. So naturally, that's got to set up a rematch. And that was WrestleMania 28, the end of an era match inside the Hell in the Cell. Undertaker talks highly of these two matches with Triple H on the DVD. Undertaker says a lot of things in this DVD. He was featured really heavily, and he had a lot of good things to say about Triple H's career, and specifically this match, and he said how much it meant to him. To me, I think it was probably my favorite part of the whole DVD, because they really got into detail about it. They showed a lot of footage. Even Vince McMahon was choked up about it, just talking about how, hey, I know these guys so well, and to see him come through that curtain for the last time together, was just really emotional. It was an end of an era. And that match, just like WrestleMania 27, when you add the dynamics of the cage and then a wild card like Shawn Michaels as the referee, the three of them were basically having a match together. It's felt like a triple threat match is what it felt like. And basically the WWE threw those 3 guys into the cage to work out their differences, and they had an amazing match. I don't know what the fuck my idol Bret Hart was thinking when he said this match was a 4 out of 10. This match was a 12 out of 10. And it's that good for the same reason that the match the year before was that good, because it told an amazing story. That was a roller coaster ride. That's how you do it. No better example of a WrestleMania match than that, and definitely one of my favorites of all time. Even though Undertaker Shawn, Mania 25, nothing will ever top that. Triple H did a very, very solid job of coming very close to topping that. Things pretty much wind down now. We're nearly at the end of this DVD. They talk about his transition into the office now, how Vince came to him and said, hey, are you ready for a real job? We need to start getting things in place here because I'm not getting any younger. And now that we're a publicly traded company and we have stockholders and board of directors and all this shit, they are putting the pressure on me for succession ideas and shit like that, and we need to start grooming you. So they talk about how Triple H basically semi-retired. He only works a very limited part-time schedule now, big pay-per-views only at the most. And now he's a big boy backstage, and they talked about NXT, which this was a couple years old, so imagine how much better it is now from when they first started talking about this. But they talked about how that's his baby, that's his child. He was put completely in charge of that, and he had ideas about this for years prior, and he always wanted to create some sort of a developmental system that, was just very, very elaborate instead of farming it out to other people like they had been doing. They needed a place, they needed a facility, they needed a school to where they can build and grow their own talent for the future. And this was probably one of the best early ideas Triple H has ever had, and I think when you look back at Triple H's legacy 30 years from now, NXT is going to play a big role in how he changed the business. Everybody puts over how responsible he is to accept this much responsibility and to do it well and to handle it the way he has. has and keep calm and all of that. People really spoke highly of him. Vince McMahon, I swear he was tearing up in the DVD. You know, he really seems like he truly loves Triple H. I think he has found a good guy, a good as possible guy to take over one day, because you know somebody's got to do it. If somebody has to be the next Vince McMahon, you have to think to yourself, okay, who should that person be? The fact that it's Triple H, I don't think is the worst thing in the world at all. Vince McMahon seems to trust him and like him a lot. All the roster members, Big Show, Randy Orton, Undertaker, they all talked about how impressed they were with how Triple H has handled himself so far in this executive role and how much he truly has on his plate along with Stephanie. Do they have 4 daughters now? Is that right? 3 or 4? I can't remember now, but they got a lot of kids. So a lot of the wrestlers were saying, yeah, you know, when I'm off the road and I get to go home and spend a couple of days with my family, Triple H has to go to the office, you know, and do more work and all this shit. So he's got just a whole bunch of shit going on in his life, and it's never going to end for him. I don't envy him. I think even Big Show said in the DVD, he goes, I wouldn't want to be Triple H. Holy shit. You know, this guy has just got, 90-hour weeks ahead of him until he dies. Nobody wants to live like that. And I personally don't envy the guy at all. I don't think I would want or even need that much responsibility. I would want to enjoy life, smell the fresh air, look at the ocean, go on vacation, travel, see the world. I don't know if my brain could handle being stuck in a fantasy land of professional wrestling 24 fucking hours a day. I think I'd go out of my mind. So Triple H deserves a lot of credit for him accepting all of this and saying, okay, I need to take this seriously, I need to go for it, and he's doing it, and he's doing it well. They close out the DVD just talking about his family, how much he cares about his daughters and Stephanie and some of their day-to-day lives, you know, all the working out they do and staying fit and staying motivated and staying driven. Pretty sure Vince McMahon is teaching them a lot of that as well, because everybody's told stories about how Vince McMahon is some sort of an android. He doesn't sleep at all. So naturally, the people that are going to take Vince's place, Vince is going to want to make sure that they have the exact same mentality. And the show ends with a really nice, tasteful tribute to the game, Triple H. It was definitely great to watch this DVD again. I haven't seen it since it came out. I definitely do recommend watching it if you have not already. As far as how it stacks up to other WWE DVDs, I don't know if it's one of my favorites. I really like Stone Cold's DVD. I liked Mankind's or Mick Foley's most recent one. I liked CM Punk's. I liked Chris Jericho's. I liked Edge's. I might like all of those. Even Paul Heyman. I might like all those DVDs a little bit better than Triple H, but this was still a very, very awesome DVD. And if you haven't seen it, buy it on Amazon or eBay. I'm sure you can pick it up for $5 or $6, and it might even be on the WWE Network. I wouldn't be surprised if it was. So I thank you for listening to my return edition of GoodMicWork's pay-per-view and DVD reviews. Hopefully it will not be too long before I do another one. It's not going to be very soon, but it's not going to be very long either, so stay tuned. And also, as usual, feel free to leave any requests below. I will take them all into consideration. Until next time, peace.